So you need to grab your exterior pieces. So that is these. If you have your zipper attached, we're going to go ahead and unzip it all the way. I kept the zipper on as this just made it easier when I was sewing everything together to make sure that nothing was upside down. We also need your LG piece and your LGE pieces. We're going to put the main panels off to the side for now and focus on LG and LGE. First thing you need to do, and again you'll notice my foam is already attached, so the first thing that you need to do is line up these edges. They will be the longer edge on LGE and the shorter edge on LG. Pin them in place. Do this on both of the short edges of LG. Pin it in place. And then you will sew this with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm going to sew the second side as well. Then you're going to press the seam away from this LGE piece. So the seam will be going down towards the finished LG, or the LG piece. So I'm going to take it to my iron and press it so that this is pressed down towards the LG piece. Okay, now that this is pressed, I'm going to top stitch this with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Top stitch both sides. So the other short end as well. So I've top stitched here. Now I'm going to top stitch this one. Okay, so now those are top stitched. We're going to make some marks just as we did when we attached the exterior to the side gusset. So you need to make your mark on your lining gusset for your seam allowance. So you're going to need your ruler to make that mark. Kristin gives the measurements in the pattern. So you're going to mark it all the way down the lining gusset. I'm going to go finish marking this and I will be right back. Okay, so this is all marked up now. Another thing I wanted to share is the lining gusset doesn't have any interfacing like Decoville or Peltex attached, but there were some marks that Kristin had us make when we attached it. I've gone ahead and drawn those lines on because this helps know where to start and stop when you're sewing the bottom. So I've gone ahead and drawn those on. I'm not basting any Peltex or Decoville onto this piece, but those marks will be helpful when you're sewing this to your panels. So now we need your lining panel. I've pinned my zipper out of the way so I don't accidentally sew it into my seam, and I've also clipped my key minder to my slip pocket again so I don't accidentally sew it into the seam. Just as we did with the exterior, we're going to pin. So first thing you need to do is the seam with the LGE where it meets LG. You want that to line up with your trim and zipper panel seam. So you want that to be lined up so when you look inside the bag, it is one continuous line. Hang on, I'll pin it in another spot. All right, so this trim and zipper panel continues, so it's one line. So it will go from here right over. This here lines up. These two seams line up here. Once you have that pinned, go ahead and pin at the top just to hold it in place. Pin on the other side. Make sure your panel is not twisted. Again, line up your trim and zipper panel. I'm going to cut this thread first. Line up your trim and zipper panel seam with the seam on your LGE and your LG. Line them all up. They will nest because of the way we've pressed LGE on this panel and the way we've pressed the trim and zipper panel. One's pressed up, one's pressed down. So they'll actually nest and fit together nicely. Once you get it all pinned in place, go ahead and pin at the top just to hold it there. Then we're going to pin the bottom center. We're going to pin that in place as well. all the way across. Stop just before you reach these lines you drew here on this end of your bottom. Then we'll pin all the way down the sides. There will be some excess fabric, and that's okay. It will all work out in the end. There won't be quite as much as there was with the exterior. So now your line here for when we sew the bottom, that is the line we're going to use when we sew the bottom. We need a line here for knowing where to start or stop, sorry, when we reach the bottom of the bag. So I'm going to go ahead and draw some lines now so I know where to stop when I reach the bottom of the bag. You want to stop a ½ inch away. This helps give those nice box corners when we're done. There we go. So now we're going to sew the sides of the lining gusset to our main panels with a ½ inch seam allowance going all the way down, stopping when we reach this ½ inch mark. You'll sew the other side as well, the same way, stopping when you reach the ½ inch mark. You'll also sew a second row of stitches just as we did for the exterior. Don't forget to backstitch at start and stop. When you're approaching your bottom, you want to pull your fabric so that you don't accidentally stitch over anything that you shouldn't. You should only be sewing through one layer of the side gusset and the one layer of the lining main panel. Now I'm going to sew the second side, except I'm going to start where this ½ inch mark is and go up towards the top, backstitching at start and stop. You want to make sure you're not sewing over your zipper panel. So you want to make sure that the zipper panel stays loose. Okay, so there is our first side sewn to the lining main panel. Now we're going to sew the bottom to the lining main panel, starting and stopping at this ½ inch mark on both ends. Make sure you pull your side gusset out of the way so that you're not stitching over that. You're only stitching over the bottom. And there is our bottom sewn to our main panel. Now we need our remaining lining main panel. We're going to, again, pin our zipper out of the way so we don't catch it in the seam allowance. And you're going to clip again, lining up those trim and zipper panel seams to the LG seams so that everything is nicely lined up when you finish the bag. Line up your center markings at the bottom. You will need to leave the opening in the bottom of the bag. I've sewn this side closed, but I'm going to show you what to do. This is the side I want my opening in, the side that does not have my my laptop sleeve. I want to leave it in the side that has the slip pocket, so I'll show you what I'm going to do there to open that back up. Pinning the sides all the way down now. There we go. So I have everything pinned. When I'm sewing, I want to make sure I'm not catching my zipper panel. So you want to make sure everything is out of the way. And you're going to do the same thing. Start and stop at the top and stop a ½ inch away from the bottom, and you're going to sew a second row of stitching. I've sewn my sides and I've gone ahead and done the second row of stitching beside it, just like we did on the exterior. Now I'm going to sew the bottom. The laptop sleeve is going to be there, so it's going to be tight. Once that is sewn, I'm going to check. We're going to sew the sides just like we did with the exterior. So pinch these sides in right here, and you're going to sew from your stitches right across to the other side where your stitches are. Repeat that on the other side. So pinch this so you get a nice flat seam. Put some clips in place and stitch from your stitching here all the way across until you reach the other set of stitches on the other side. This is creating your nice boxed corners. Now we're going to trim all our seam allowances down. Oh, I forgot. I'm going to sew a second row of stitches. Now we can trim our seam allowances. This will help reduce the bulk, making everything push out nicely. Careful not to clip your stitches. Clip your corners too. And that is how it will look, all completed and trimmed. You can go ahead and check to make sure that you got all your seams. There's no holes anywhere. Now is the time to do that, because if you go ahead and construct a bag and then you notice there's a hole in the lining, once the bag's all constructed, it's a little bit harder to go back and fix it. Now, I didn't leave the opening in the bottom yet, so what I'm going to do is, using my seam ripper, go back through and unpick those stitches. You can always leave the opening instead of doing it this way. This just seems to be how I always do it, because I always forget to leave my opening in the bottom. So I'm going to use my seam ripper and make the hole. And you want it big enough to be able to pull this bag through. If you prefer, you can leave the side where you're leaving your opening untrimmed, so leave it the full seam allowance and don't trim there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here where it ends the opening where I unstitched it, and I'm going to back stitch here just to make sure that this doesn't come undone any further. So I'm going to go in and back stitch that on both sides. That'll stop that from coming unstitched. And then the other thing I'm going to do is just run a little bit of basting stitches along here to hold these pieces to my panels. Doesn't have to be the whole way, just enough to catch it. That way there, when I turn this and I go to stitch it closed, I don't have to worry about this shifting on me and not being caught in that seam. There we go. Now I have my opening for turning my bag right side out. My slip pocket, I'm going to remove these pins that I placed to hold my zipper. And there it is. All completed, the lining with a recessed zipper panel.